They said Samuel Hawthorne arrived in the port town of New Bedford in the autumn of 1843 with no luggage, no family, and no past. He stepped off a merchant vessel that no one remembered docking, wearing a coat of deep green wool with buttons shaped like unfamiliar constellations. His eyes were a color that seemed to shift between steel and stormlight depending on how the clouds moved overhead. The dock workers who saw him claimed his voice carried an accent that belonged to no country they had ever heard, but every word was clear, as if he spoke in the tongue of thought itself. From the moment he set foot on the cobblestones, it was as if the air changed. The gulls went silent. The wind paused, and every face turned toward him, not because he demanded attention, but because something about him rewired the instincts of those around him. The townspeople would later describe the feeling as standing on the edge of a great drop, unable to see the bottom. Within an hour of arriving, he walked straight to the home of Reverend Abel Thatcher, a man known for keeping meticulous parish records and guarding secrets in equal measure. No one knew why Hawthorne knocked on that door, but Thatcher let him in without a word, as though expecting him. The curtains were drawn, and the two men spoke for nearly 3 hours. When Hawthorne finally emerged, his expression was unchanged, but the Reverend's hands trembled when he tried to lock the door. That night, strange lights appeared over the harbor, shifting in slow, deliberate patterns that made fishermen swear they were watching a language written in the sky. At least 5 residents claimed they dreamed of standing on a shore made of black glass, with a moon that hung far too close, casting shadows that moved without their owners. By morning, those who had dreamed of the black shore would find Hawthorne waiting in the street, watching them silently with a faint nod as though. The Reverend did not attend morning service the next day, and for the first time in 26 years, the church doors remained locked. The absence stirred unease through New Bedford, but no one dared knock on the parsonage door. Not until Mrs. Eliza Prentice, a widow known for her lack of fear, went to bring bread and found the latch cold and unmoving from the inside. She swore she heard voices behind the walls, not whispering, but speaking in some unbroken rhythm, like the counting of time itself. Hawthorne was seen walking the perimeter of the church at dawn, pausing at each corner with his head tilted slightly, as though listening to something far away. His hands moved in slow, deliberate motions, tracing symbols into the frost that vanished before anyone could read them. When asked by young Thomas Whitmore what he was doing, Hawthorne looked down at the boy and said, "Only, you will not remember the shape until you need it." Then he turned and walked away, leaving footprints that seemed deeper than the snow should allow. By evening, a rumor began to spread that Hawthorne had been sent by a society older than the church, older than the town, older even than the colonies themselves. The few who dared to speak of it called it the Circle of Nine, a gathering said to guard knowledge too dangerous for ordinary men, knowledge that could remake the mind and bend the will of others with nothing more than a glance. 2 nights later, the lights returned above the harbor, but this time they formed a single ring and hovered motionless. The water beneath glowed faintly, as though something vast and alive had risen just below the surface. The fishermen did not set out the next morning. Every boat remained tied, every net hung untouched. Hawthorne was not seen that day nor the next. When he finally appeared, it was outside the schoolhouse, standing motionless until the last child left the yard. His eyes followed each on. The town council gathered in secret that night meeting in the back room of the mill, where the walls were thick with cotton dust and the windows had been nailed shut for years. They spoke in low voices about Hawthorne, about the change in the air since his arrival. They did not speak of the lights above the harbor, not openly, for even mentioning them seemed to draw a heaviness into the room. One man, a merchant named Silas Crane, swore that he had seen Hawthorne step out of a place where there had been only shadow, no doorway, no opening, simply a fold in the dark from which he emerged, as though the world itself had allowed him passage. At the edge of the meeting, Reverend Corbin sat silent, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles looked carved from marble. When finally asked what he knew, the Reverend said only this: "He is not a man who travels to places, he is a man who brings the places with him." Then he refused to speak another word, The council voted to send 2 men to follow Hawthorne the next time he left the parsonage. They chose Crane and a younger man named Ezra Pike, who had fought in the war and returned with eyes that no longer startled easily the following morning just before the sun broke. Hawthorne left the parsonage, walking north toward the woods. His pace was steady, not hurried yet, not meandering. Crane and Pike followed at a careful distance. They trailed him for over an hour until the trees thickened and the path disappeared. Hawthorne did not slow. He moved through the forest as though it bent itself to his direction. Finally, they reached a clearing, and there in the center stood an archway of stone blackened as though by fire. No road led to it, no structure supported it, and yet it stood solid and perfect. Hawthorne stepped through and vanished. Crane swore later that the air on the other side shimmered like heat above a forge, and that he heard something like a choir singing. From that day forward, Hawthorne began to move among the townspeople, not as a visitor, but as a quiet architect, shaping the rhythms of their days. He never demanded obedience. He simply made suggestions in a tone that made refusal feel unnatural. He would stand beside a man in the market and remark that it might be wise to take a different road home, and later that day, the man would find the original road blocked by a fallen tree. He would tell a mother that her child should not drink from the well, and within the week, the well water would run cloudy and sour. No one could prove he caused these things, yet none could deny they happened exactly as he implied. People began to visit him, unbidden, bringing gifts of food, firewood, and in one case, a lock of a newborn's hair. When asked why they would offer such things, they could not give a clear reason, only that it felt necessary. It was not fear that drove them, but something far subtler, something that felt like gravity. One evening, Reverend Corbin confronted him outside the parsonage. The Reverend accused him of practicing influence that was not of God. Hawthorne smiled faintly and said, "Influence is the only language men truly understand." The Reverend tried to quote scripture, but the words fell flat in the cold air, and Corbin left that night looking 10 years older. In the weeks that followed, certain townsfolk began to dream of places they had never seen, vast cities of black stone under red skies, rivers that glowed with pale light, mountains that moved like breathing beasts. They woke shaken yet strangely calm, for the dreams never felt like nightmares but instructions. By late autumn, Hawthorne no longer needed to speak to change the will of those around him. He would simply be present in a room, and conversations would drift toward his unspoken desires. Those who resisted found themselves making small mistakes, forgetting important matters misspell. It began with the Harvest Festival, a tradition older than any living soul in the valley, where the whole town gathered to share the yield of the year. Normally, the air would be thick with the smell of roasting meat, the sound of fiddles, the laughter of children racing between stalls. But this year, an unshakable stillness clung to the square as if the air itself refused to carry joy. Hawthorne arrived without fanfare, yet every head turned toward him as if drawn by an unseen cord. He did not speak. He simply walked the length of the main street, and with each step, voices lowered instruments. Faltered conversations died. One by one, the townspeople found themselves falling into silence without knowing why, until the only sound was the creak of the wooden stage in the cold evening wind. A young boy, no more than 7, broke the stillness by laughing. But it was the wrong kind of laugh, too sharp, too hollow. The boy's mother yanked him close and covered his mouth, but the sound had already torn through the air and left a stain. Hawthorne stopped walking, turned slowly toward the child, and stared for what could have been a minute or an hour. When he finally looked away, the boy's eyes had gone glassy, and he did not speak again for 3 days. The Reverend tried to restart the music, calling for the fiddler to play, yet the man's hands trembled so violently he could not hold the bow. Others stepped forward to offer bread and cider, but the food felt tasteless and the drink thin as water. No one wanted to admit it, but the festival was over before it began. The crowd drifted apart in uneasy silence, heading home under a moon that seemed far too bright. By morning, whispers spread that this was not the first time such stillness had followed Hawthorne. In other towns along the river, entire gatherings had fallen into wordless hours when he passed through as if a single thought pressed into every mind at once. Elias waited by the blacksmith's door until the moon slipped behind the clouds and the night grew thick with silence. Suddenly the handle turned slow and deliberate, revealing the pale face of a man whose eyes gleamed like frozen lakes. Samuel Hawthorne stepped inside his presence, colder than the chill wind that rattled the windows. Elias raised his hammer but said nothing. Hawthorne smiled thinly, a serpent's grin that barely touched his eyes. "You seek answers," Hawthorne said, voice soft, yet cutting through the dark like a knife. "But some truths come at a price few are willing to pay." Elias felt the weight of years in Hawthorne's gaze, a burden not of age, but of something ancient and relentless. "I want to know who you are and why you haunt this valley like a ghost." Elias replied, steady, but his heart hammered a frantic rhythm. "Why do you prey on these people, turn them into shadows of themselves?" Hawthorne's laugh was a low rasp. "I do not prey, Elias. I liberate. I teach survival in a world that has forgotten what survival means." He stepped closer, revealing the faint scars beneath his weathered coat, the marks of battles fought in silence. Elias could smell the cold iron of death in the air as Hawthorne spoke of necessity, sacrifice, and the rebirth of the strong through the consumption of the weak. The weak cling to false hope, to broken laws. They starve when they could feast and perish when they could endure. Elias shook his head. "You call this salvation cannibalism, murder madness." Hawthorne's smile grew wider. "Call it what you will, but it is the truth. Your society fears the truth buried beneath its polished lies." The room seemed to shrink around them, charged with the electric tension of predator and prey. "You have corrupted families, turned fathers against sons and wives against husbands. You have destroyed the fragile threads that hold humanity together," Elias said, voice rising, edged with fury. "I will end this madness." Hawthorne's eyes gleamed. "You cannot end what has already begun. The monster you fear is already inside you, waiting to be unleashed." Before Elias could react, Hawthorne vanished into the night, leaving behind only the faint scent of frost and decay. The blacksmith stood alone in the darkness, heart pounding with a terror that no hammer could shatter. It was Elias Rourke, the blacksmith, who decided he would not let the matter rest. Elias was a man built from fire and iron, his arms thick from decades at the forge, his temper known to flare hotter than the coals he worked. Yet even he admitted there was something unnatural about the quiet that followed Hawthorne like a shadow. He told no one of his plan for fear the idea would wither under their stares. Instead, he sharpened his questions in the privacy of his workshop, letting them ring in his skull until they felt like weapons. Elias began with the old men who sat on the porch of the general store. Men whose eyes had seen wars, floods, and famine. They spoke in half-answers, their voices breaking away mid-sentence, as though the words caught in their throats. One swore he had seen Hawthorne in this very valley 40 years ago, but the man looked no older than 30. Another insisted he remembered him from the railroad camps, though that would mean Hawthorne had worked alongside men long dead. Unsatisfied, Elias turned to the county records, dusty ledgers stacked in the courthouse basement. Here the name Samuel Hawthorne appeared not once, but many times across decades, tied to different deeds, purchases, and disputes. The handwriting changed, the signatures shifted, yet the name persisted, like a thread woven through the valley's history. Sometimes Hawthorne owned land, sometimes he sold it, sometimes he was listed as a witness to events long past, but never did the records note his birth or death. Elias felt a tightening in his chest as he flipped through the pages. The dates were impossible. The man should have been buried 3 generations ago, but here he was still walking among them, Perhaps most disturbing were the gaps, whole years where nothing was written. Then suddenly Hawthorne's name would surface again, untouched by time. That night Elias sat alone at his workbench, the fire dim and the forge. Dawn broke over Millbrook, but the light did little to warm the cold dread that had settled, like a shroud over the town. The survivors gathered in the town hall, their faces pale shadows of the people they once were. Dr. Putnam's wounds bled slowly, but his eyes burned with a fierce determination. He spoke to the crowd with a voice rough from exhaustion and fear. This is no longer just a man we face. This is a force that has twisted our neighbors' minds, turned them into weapons against us. Plans were drawn with trembling hands. They knew Hawthorne's followers were organized, prepared, and dangerous. The Thornbury house had become a fortress, a symbol of the nightmare creeping through their lives. Townsfolk armed themselves with whatever tools they could find: pitchforks, knives, old rifles, rusted from disuse. The line between friend and enemy, blurred as distrust, seeped into every glance. Thomas Thornbury's brutal attack had shattered illusions. The people who answered the call to fight were not just defending their homes. They were fighting for the very soul of Millbrook. Every step toward the Thornbury house felt heavier, with the weight of inevitable bloodshed. Children whispered in corners, eyes wide with fear, yet burning with the strange ferocity taught to them by Hawthorne. Their innocence stolen, replaced by predatory instincts, sharpened by cruel lessons. The town's leaders knew the battle ahead would test every limit of their humanity and resolve. As the sun climbed higher, the siege began. Shouts echoed through the valley, mingling with the clash of makeshift weapons. The Thornbury house stood firm, a fortress of madness and conviction. Each day bled into the next. The fight turning savage, bitter, and exhausting. In those endless hours, the people of Millbrook learned that survival could demand the unthinkable, that even love and loyalty could be weapons wielded by those transformed by Hawthorne's dark gospel. The siege dragged on through nights colder than any remembered winter's chill, wrapped the Thornbury house like a shroud. But inside, the fire of conflict burned hotter than ever. The townsfolk moved cautiously around barricades made of broken furniture and sharpened wood. Their breaths clouded the frigid air as they exchanged terse orders and fearful glances. Inside the fortress, Hawthorne's converts fought not just with weapons, but with a conviction born of twisted faith. Each strike was precise, each defense coordinated, as if they were a single creature bound by shared purpose. The Thornbury family led the charge, their eyes cold and unyielding. Grace, Thornbury's butcher knife, flashed like lightning, while her children darted beneath limbs, avoiding every blow. Dr. Putnam found himself face to face with Mary Thornbury, the girl who once held his hand as a child, now snarling with a ferocity that shattered his heart. The man who had healed wounds was forced to inflict new ones to survive. The weight of every strike bore down on his soul, reminding him how deeply the corruption had taken root. Outside the walls, the townspeople's morale waned as exhaustion and despair gnawed at their resolve. The knowledge that they were fighting their own kin twisted their hearts with unbearable sorrow. Some faltered, their hands shaking as memories collided with brutal necessity, but no one could retreat, for Hawthorne's vision demanded total conversion or annihilation. The siege became a nightmare dance of survival, loyalty, and horror, where the line between victim and perpetrator vanished into bloodied fog. As the second day dawned, a fragile silence settled over the Thornbury house, but it was only the calm before a storm. Inside the walls, Hawthorne's followers regrouped, their eyes burning with fanatic resolve, their minds sharpened by months of conditioning, prepared to endure whatever came next. The air, was thick with the scent of sweat, blood, and burning wood. Outside, Dr. Putnam and the remaining townsfolk struggled to maintain order, their faces pale from sleepless nights, and mounting fear. Each man and woman understood that defeat would mean the complete loss of everything they cherished. Families torn apart forever, communities shattered beyond repair. Hawthorne's converts launched sudden attacks that seemed to materialize from the shadows, their movements fluid and precise, striking fear into the hearts of even the bravest defenders. Joshua Foresk fell to a hidden blade, his blood staining the frozen earth as the battle became more savage and desperate. Within the chaos, a grim realization dawned on the unconverted. They faced not madmen, but a new breed of humanity, hardened by ruthless ideology. This revelation shattered their hopes for peaceful reconciliation and drove them deeper into brutal combat. The Thornbury house had become a crucible, forging monsters from ordinary people, blurring the line between saviors and destroyers. By the third night, exhaustion clawed at every soul on both sides. The siege had transformed the town into a war zone, where echoes of past friendships dissolved into cries of rage and despair. The Thornbury house stood defiant, its barricades bloodied but unbroken. Samuel Hawthorne's disciples moved like shadows, striking without warning. Their unity was a weapon sharper than any blade. Inside the house, Dr. Putnam caught a glimpse of the man who had shattered his world. Hawthorne, calm and unyielding as a cold storm. His pale eyes burned with conviction as he surveyed the chaos he had wrought. "Survival demands sacrifice," Hawthorne whispered, his voice a twisted gospel that chilled to the bone. Outside, hope flickered as reinforcements from neighboring towns began to arrive, but the damage was done. Families fought against their own kin. Love, warped into hatred by the darkness Hawthorne had spread. The battle had ceased to be about saving Millbrook. It was now a struggle to reclaim their very humanity. Dawn revealed a haunting silence broken only by the ragged breaths of the weary survivors. The Thornbury house was abandoned, its eerie stillness a testament to the sudden disappearance of Hawthorne and his followers. No sign of struggle, no trace of blood, only the echo of a nightmare that had consumed the town. The community was fractured beyond repair, scars carved deep into the hearts of those who remained. The 12 survivors who returned carried hollow eyes and haunted memories. Their silence spoke louder than words, a shared burden of unspeakable experiences. Few dared to ask what horrors had unfolded in the mountains with their former teacher. Some left town, seeking to escape the whispers and suspicious glances. Others vanished into the vast American frontier, hoping to lose themselves in its endless wilderness. Dr. Putnam documented every detail he could recall. His journals became a grim testament to a dark experiment in human nature and survival. The story of Millbrook would live on, not just as history, but as a warning about the fragility of civilization when stripped of its moral compass. Spring melted the snow, revealing grim evidence hidden beneath the ice. Search parties discovered caches scattered throughout the mountains. Carefully preserved human remains, mixed with belongings, told a story of cold calculation and methodical cruelty. Hawthorne's operation was far larger than anyone had guessed. These caches were supply depots, stocked with tools for butchering, preserving, and storing flesh. Alongside chemicals for his medicines, the sheer scale suggested a network, not just a lone madman. In one remote clearing, a hunter stumbled upon a permanent settlement. Hidden from trails and towns, it was a chilling base camp for Hawthorne's experiments. Workshops with strange instruments, advanced preservation equipment, and detailed journals filled the area. The writings revealed his true purpose beyond cannibalism or madness. He aimed to create self-sustaining communities, prepared for societal collapse. Communities built on survival at any cost. The journals described a pattern repeated over 15 years. Infiltrate isolated communities during times of crisis. Build trust with medical help. Introduce extreme survival methods. Gradually break down moral limits, convert or eliminate resistance. Then move on to the next target. Hawthorne was methodical. His long-term vision was a network of these communities spread across the Northeast, each linked and capable of enduring the harshest conditions. His work was overseen by a council of shadowy directors, suggesting a far larger organization behind the scenes. Hawthorne was never caught, despite massive searches. His disappearance left behind only questions. Some believed he died in the wilderness. Others thought he moved to new territories, ready to start his horrific work again. Sightings of a pale-eyed man, matching his description, appeared across New England and beyond, each time following the same deadly pattern. Arrival during hardship, gaining trust, enforcing radical survival laws, vanishing with chosen followers. In a mining camp far north in Michigan, harsh winter brought death and despair. Then came a stranger, pale-eyed, calm, confident. He healed the sick, shared knowledge of food preservation and rationing. The miners clung to hope, but when spring arrived, the stranger vanished, taking 12 miners with him. Those left behind showed strange behaviors: obsession with food, raw meat cravings, new social hierarchies, shaped by survival, not law or kindness. Dr. Putnam's last journal entry warns that beneath the surface of civilized men lurks a monster waiting for its chance. He understood that with time, patience, and the right pressure, any mind can be bent to accept horrors once unthinkable. The Millbrook incident was not madness, but a revelation of humanity's fragile veneer. The coming Civil War and industrial upheavals proved how quickly society's rules break when survival is on the line. The story of Samuel Hawthorne is a chilling mirror held up to our own nature. It asks what price we pay when survival becomes the only law. When does the healer turn into the destroyer, the teacher into a corrupter? His network of shadow communities may still lurk in the wilderness, waiting for the next crisis to awaken their dark gospel. This tale is a warning. Civilization's grip is fragile, and monsters don't need to be born. They can be made. What do you think lies hidden in the remote corners of history? Could Hawthorne's legacy endure, unseen among us? Write your thoughts below and subscribe for more dark truths from forgotten chapters of the past.